Genesis 2 through 3. And on the seventh day, God finished the work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all the work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and hallowed it, because on it God rested from all the work that he had done in creation. And Exodus 20:8 through 11. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work. You, your son or your daughter, your male or female slave, your livestock, or the alien resident in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and consecrated it. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. So every June, almost every June, I receive a phone call from a Kansas farmer friend of mine, and he says, "It's ready." Any Kansas people know what that means? What's ready? Wheat harvest is ready. And usually it goes something like this. Well, I had a neighbor who got out in the fields, and I wasn't sure that it would be ready yet, and I went and tested it, and it was ready. And at that moment, everything kind of stops. Life changes. It's wheat harvest time. It's an exciting time in Kansas. And so somebody who's new to all this, to this culture, when we lived in Kansas, I said, well, why is wheat harvest so special? How is it different from, say, row crops? Not to demean row crops at all. How is it different? Well, when that wheat's ready, you got to get it, because there are all kinds of bad things that can happen to that wheat. When it's ready, you go. It's going to dry out in the heat. It could get hit by hail. There could be a rainstorm, hard rain that smashes it down or gets it all moldy and mildewy. When that wheat's ready, you go. You got to get ready. Like, oh, wow, that's really kind of exciting. And so these wheat farmers have these long, long days where they're out in the field from as soon as the dew point is low enough, the humidity is low enough to get out there. They're out there, and they'll go all night if they could, but at some point the humidity comes up too much and they can't harvest anymore. It's nonstop. This wheat harvest is nonstop. And as a pastor, occasionally I would have a farmer ask me, like, what do I do on Sunday during harvest time? That is the question. Right? The question, what do I do on Sunday during harvest time? It's ready. The harvest is ready. And the forecast is for rain and maybe even hail. Do I keep the Sabbath? Or do I get out there and harvest? What would you say? What would you say to that question? I'm going to pose that to all of us. What to say to that question? I'll be honest. I avoided it. I didn't want to weigh in on that one. I was a coward. I copped out when I would get that question. I don't know what I would say today. But there are sort of several responses that come to mind that I could say. Based on sort of different kinds of theologies. The first is, well, God will bless you if you keep the Sabbath. Nothing bad will befall you. The rain will hold off. The hail will hold off. It'll be just fine. So I could say that, which is things that we say, right? Sometimes we say those kinds of things. That if you keep the commandment, God will bless you, and it'll all be well with you. That's a lie, I think. So I don't want to say that. I don't think that's true. Jesus said, this guy Jesus, you heard of him? He said, it rains on the just and the unjust. So it's going to rain. Whether or not it rains is not determined by whether you keep the Sabbath or not. So that's the one. That's kind of one thing. That's one response. So no, I'm not going to answer that. The second one is a different slant. That keeping the Sabbath is not about that particular Sabbath. You might keep the Sabbath and it might rain. But keeping the Sabbath generally is a good thing. So you might miss out on the productivity, which is the key here, right? Productivity, avoiding waste, efficiency. We've got the wheat in the field, it's ready, we got to get it out. It would betray a concern about productivity if we didn't, right? So the argument then is, well, in this particular case, keeping the Sabbath might not lead to the most productive result, but in a general sense, keeping the Sabbath makes us more productive. It makes us more efficient. We all need time off. We all need rest to be at our best. So the Sabbath serves productivity or efficiency in a general way. So it's a good idea to keep the Sabbath, just for all of us to keep the Sabbath, because it makes us more productive and more efficient and more rested and healthier and all these kinds of things. Now, I don't know if that's true. It might be a lie. It might not be. It might be true. That's for some graduate in statistics, some graduate student in statistics to figure out if that's true, if Sabbath makes us more productive. I think they're doing experiments now about the work week. A 35-hour work week makes us more productive somehow. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know how they figure that out. But it betrays something about our society, doesn't it? We value productivity. Productivity is the highest value. Getting the most food out of that field of wheat is the highest value. Being the most efficient that we can possibly be with our time is the highest value that we could have. Right? That's the utility. So in that framework, Sabbath becomes nothing more than a utility, a kind of tool that we use to make ourselves more productive. This, too, I think, misses the point of the Sabbath, misses the mark in a major way. It's as if we need to justify keeping the Sabbath by the standards of our day, by the values of our day, which are productive. Now, you look at in the old days, like in the old days, this wouldn't have been a question. These farmers wouldn't have asked the question. You kept the Sabbath because you kept the Sabbath. It's what you did. There was no debate about it. There was no sense to figure out why you kept the Sabbath, or maybe you shouldn't. You just did. Because the values, traditional values of a community said you kept the Sabbath. It's what everybody did. And in the old days, probably in the living memory of some of us here, our whole society did that. Things shut down on the Sabbath. You just didn't. You were looked down upon if you kept the Sabbath, right? Or if you didn't keep the Sabbath. If you went out to that wheat field and harvested, people would look down on you. The other thing is that you had a community. This was done in a community. We're in this together. So we're going to keep the Sabbath, but if it rains on your field, if it gets muddy, or if it hails on your field, we're here for you because we're here for each other. We're asking you to do something that's hard. We're asking you on a perfect day for harvesting not to harvest. We're asking you to do, that's a big ask for a tradition, for a community, right? That's a big ask. We're asking you to do that, and we're here for you if things don't go the best. It's a community, and it's one of the ways that communities keep Sabbath. So why? What is the purpose and meaning of the Sabbath? It's not to make us more productive. If it's not to make us better people in some way, if it's not to help us do good on the other 6 days, what is the Sabbath for? Why do we have it? Why is it consecrated? Why is it one with the sacred? Consagrado. Why is it one with the sacred? I had a sabbatical in, last year, over a year ago now, and it was a transformative experience for me personally. It's one of the most important experiences in my life. And I know that when you have a unique experience, and it's a powerful experience, there's a tendency to see everything through that lens, and to think that the solution to everybody's problems is the sabbatical. Well, if you just took a sabbatical, you would figure everything out. So I recognize there's a tendency to do that when you've had that kind of experience. But you also get kind of weird. When I went to the Philippines and came back, I felt strange. I still feel kind of strange. It made me a strange person. Didn't quite fit in anymore. And that's the way the sabbatical makes me feel. I don't feel like I quite fit in anymore. And what I realized on my sabbatical was this. The purpose of my sabbatical, no matter what the church policy says, sorry about the church, to denigrate the church policy, but no matter what the church policy says, the purpose of my sabbatical was not a utility. It was not to make me a better pastor, a more arrested pastor. It was not to give me perspective, not to make me healthier. The purpose of my sabbatical was to be consagrado, consecrated with the sacred in that time. To experience and know God just as I am known in that holy, sacred time. Christians have had an ambivalent relationship with the Sabbath through our history, in part because it's a Jewish practice in many ways. And the earliest Christians kept the Sabbath, kept the seventh-day Sabbath, right? Kept the Friday evening at sundown to Saturday evening at sundown Sabbath. That was their practice because they were Jews. And over time, even by the end of the first century, Christians were keeping the Lord's Day as a holy day, the Lord's Day, the day of resurrection. And more important than sundown on Friday was sunrise on Sunday morning. So that became kind of a holy day. And some of the practices of Sabbath were adapted to the Lord's Day, and some were not. And through the centuries, there have been a range of practices that Christians have had, and Christians of different stripes have felt differently about the Sabbath. But I would say, through most of the last, several hundred years, a kind of what we would call first-day Sabbatarianism. There's a word for you, first-day Sabbatarianism. Adapting the practice of Sabbath to the Lord's Day, to the first day of the week, to Sunday, to the resurrection day. That was kind of the norm in the church. Yet so much of the literature around Sabbath is distinctly Jewish and comes from the Talmud. So there's this kind of tricky dynamic. For me, I have, after my experience of sabbatical, and I read things about the Sabbath, and mostly it's frustrating to me, because most of the things I read are some version of that utilitarian argument, that Sabbath rest makes us better people. It makes us better Christians. We can do better if we keep the Sabbath. And we reverse that. It's reversed from what actually is. Sabbath is about being, and life in its fullness is about being. So I pulled a book, as I gotten ready for this series, pulled a book off my shelf, called The Sabbath. Classic book written in 1950 by the Jewish rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. Maybe some of you are familiar with this book. And I said, yes. I read this book and I said, yes, that's it. That's it. That's what Sabbath means. I'm not crazy. Well, I might be, but I'm not the only one. So that's encouraging, right? I'm not crazy, but I'm not the only one. That's it. Heschel says that the Sabbath is as if eternity uttered a day. It's as if eternity uttered a day, that the seeds of eternal life are planted in each one of us. And on the Sabbath, those seeds flower. We are alive to God in our being in a way that we can be in no other time. Now, the Sabbath is like leaving time altogether and entering eternity. God created time, right? God created time at creation. God created the days that came into being. And we are bound by those days, except for one day. Our clocks disappear. And you'll notice that in the practice of the Sabbath, it begins when the sun goes down on Friday. You don't look at your watch to figure out when the Sabbath begins. You look at the sky. You look at creation. Your watch becomes irrelevant. And you leave time all together, and you enter eternity, the dwelling place of God. For that one day, you participate fully in what it means to be a creature created by God. And this is the meaning and purpose of our lives. It's not the grind of productivity and efficiency. Jesus said that we don't live by bread alone. And he said, is not life more than food and the body more than clothing? It's a rhetorical question, and the resounding answer is yes. Life is much more than those things. Yet we don't answer that question that way. We answer that rhetorical question, no, life is not more than those things. And we come to believe that Sabbath, the day of eternity, exists for the sole purpose of our own productivity. So when you make something sacred, people will ask this, when you make something sacred, when you say that we are uniquely alive to God on this day, what about the other days? Is God not present in those days? Are those days not meaningful in some way? Yet the truth is, those days find their meaning and the fullness of their meaning in preparation and anticipation for the Sabbath. The preparation of the Sabbath begins on the first day and leads up to the seventh day. Advent finds its meaning in Christmas. Advent would have no meaning at all if it weren't for Christmas, right? Lent finds its meaning in Easter. Lent would be pointless if it weren't for Easter, if it weren't for the glory of those 50 days of Easter. And in the same way, the 6 days find their meaning in the seventh day, their purpose, their intent. We live our lives towards God, towards being with God, towards the Sabbath. That is our purpose. Now, Sabbath is one of those things that everybody likes to talk about, but nobody does anything about it. The Hebrew text invokes the Sabbath a number of times, and two that are really crucial in Jewish thought are the text that was read this morning from Exodus, the commandment to remember the Sabbath. So this morning we are remembering it. We are remembering. Remember the Sabbath. Remember that it's consecrated. Remember that it's a holy day. Remember. And the other word is observe. Observe the Sabbath. Do it. Practice it. Don't just talk about it, live it. And so we are beginning a 5-part series on Sabbath. Next week we will be in the woods, Whitmer Woods, that's west, so it's right over that direction, catty corner across the street by Uterkult Funeral Home. We will be there practicing Sabbath together in creation. And then we'll have 3 more Sundays going through the end of July, focusing on Sabbath. And where Talash and we've been really excited about this. We've been talking about Sabbath, and we are excited about this. And where we want to go with this is to begin in August a 3-month congregation-wide season of practicing Sabbath. Now, maybe it'll go longer than that. We're going to start with 3 months. 3-month season of practicing Sabbath. And we want everybody's help in thinking about what this might mean. When should we do it? What should our Sabbath be? How should we think about it? When should it begin? When should it end? What should we do? What should we not do? What kind of things, how should we think about transportation? The activities that we do? Technology? Entertainment? And even more important, how should we fill our time? How should we spend our time on the Sabbath? Remember, so we have that's the observing part, and the remembering part is remembering that it's holy. And it's our time to be who we are in God. So I invite all of us to enter this season with playfulness. I think this could be fun, because the Sabbath is supposed to it can be a playful time. Let's make this a playful time and a joyful time as we think about how to delight in the joy of our Creator.